Hi all, welcome back. So I am back with the last and final module of Human Resource Management. In this module, we'll be dealing with the employee relations. So we can see about the meaning and significance of employee relations. We can see about the employee relations in unionized and non-unionized organization, participative management, how can you handle grievances, how can you manage discipline, and conducting domestic inquiry. So all these topics we'll be dealing with in this module. So let's start. Employee relations. Let's see what is an employee relation. See, in an organization cannot perform with the help of chairs, tables and fans only, or any other non-living entities. It needs human beings who work together and perform to achieve the goals and objectives of the organization. The human beings work together towards a common goal at a common place are called the employees. And in fact, the employees are the major assets of an organization. We all know that. The success and failure of any organization is directly proportional to the labor put by each and every employee. The employees must share a good rapport with each and other and strive hard to realize the goal of the organization. And they should complement each other's work and work together as a single unit. For the employees, the organization must come first and all their personal interests should take a back seat. What is an employee relations? So employee relations is also known in other terms such as it's also known as industry relation, labor management relation and labor relations. Now every individual, they share a certain relationship with his colleagues at the workplace. The relationship is either warm, so bad. The relationship can be between anyone in the organization, between the co-worker, between an employee and a superior, between two members in the management and so on. It is important that the employees, they share a healthy relationship with each other to deliver their best performances. An individual, he spends his maximum time at the workplace and his fellow workers are the ones with whom he spends the maximum hours in a day. No way can he afford to fight with his colleagues, is it? So, conflicts and misunderstandings only add to tensions and in turn decrease the productivity of the individual as well as the organizations. So one needs to discuss so many things at work and needs the advice and suggestions of all to reach to a solution which can benefit the individual as well as the organization. No individual can work alone. He needs the support and guidance of his fellow workers to come out with a brilliant idea and deliver his level best. So, employee relations refer to the relationship shared among the employees in an organization. The employees must be comfortable with each other for a healthy environment at work. It is a prime duty of the superiors and team leaders to discourage conflicts in the team and encourage a healthy relationship among the employees. So once again, let's see the meaning of employee relations. The term employee relations refers to a company's effort to manage the relationship between the employer and the employees. Not only the employer and the employees, but also the other entities who are working in the organization. An organization with a good employee relations program provides fair and consistent treatment to all employees so that they will be committed to their jobs and loyal to the company. See, certain definitions are given by certain personalities in your textbook. Let's see the definition by Dale Yoder. So Dale Yoder says that industrial relations are a relationship between the management and employees or among employees and the organizations that characterize and grow out of employment. Now you can see certain nature of the employee relations and some scope of employee relations. So you can go through them. And you can find certain objectives also of employee relations. The participants or the actors in industrial relations or the employee relations. So here you can see about 6 participants: the employee, employer, government, trade union, employee association, courts and tribunals. So let's see one by one. Let's start with the employer. The employer, he possesses certain rights when compared to laborers. They have the right to hire and fire them. Management can also affect the workers' interest by exercising their right to relocate, close or merge the factory or to introduce any kind of changes like the technology changes or any other changes. Next is the employees. Workers, they seem to improve the terms and conditions of the employment. They exchange views with management and voice their grievances. They also want to share decision-making power of management. Workers, they generally unite to form unions against management and get the support from these unions. Next is the government. The central and state government influences and regulates industrial relations through laws, rules, agreements, awards of court and the like. It also includes third parties and labor and tribunal codes also. These are the three main important parties or the actors in the industrial relation. The rest of the actors or the participants are the trade union, employer association, courts and tribunals. So they all are linked together, so you can find the meaning in your textbook. So please go through them. Also, you can find certain factors and influence the employer relations, like the economic factors, the technological factors, institutional factors, political factors, social and cultural factors, organizational factors, and the global factors. So all these factors, they influence the employer relations. So please do go through them. Now let's see what is the importance or the significance of employee relations. So we know that employee relations is all about a smooth relationship between the employer and the employee. So how does this employee relations in an organization help us? So I'm discussing here only about 4 points. The first one is that it minimizes industrial conflicts. Yes, it is true that it discourages the fights and conflicts among the individuals. See, people tend to adjust more and stop finding faults in each other if there is a good employee relations. And individuals, they don't waste their time in meaningless conflicts and disputes. Rather, they'll concentrate on their work and strive hard to perform better. And they will start treating each other as friends, and they try their level best to compromise and make everyone happy. Next one is it increases workers' morale. It not only increases workers' morale, but it also helps to motivate the employees. Like, it helps to motivate the employees to stay in the organization for longer period of time. Like, it helps in reducing the absenteeism, etc. So one will feel secure and confident, and thus will deliver his best. It is okay that if someone share the secret with your colleagues, but you should know where to draw the line. So therefore, a sense of trust is moral. So employee relations in an organization will help to increase the workers' morale. And the employee and the employee will think about the benefit of each others, and the workers, they will work enthusiastically for the achievement of the organization goals. This is because the workers believe that they share the same concern as the employees, increase production. So once there is a better morale, then only the workers will think that this is their organization, and they will also work hard to increase the production of the organization. Next comes to provides fair benefits to the workers. So once there is a good employee relations, the employer will have like the employees, and he will give fair remunerations or fair benefits to everyone equally, and he won't rate one employee as his favorite or something like that. So he'll treat every employee equally. The workers must be given enough monetary and non-monetary motivation so that they can live a balanced life. This can happen only when the industrial relations between the workers and the management are friendly enough. Then it comes in facilitation of changes. If the organization has a supportive and cooperative atmosphere, changes are easily accepted. So if the employee is good enough to deliver a motivating work to the employees are they will be skilled enough, or they can accept any kind of changes or facilitation in the organization. So there's the benefit of all the most recent inventions, technology and other advancements can be utilized effectively. The workers will understand the need of the hour and willingly adapt themselves to the required changes. You can find some other points like makes collective bargaining efficient, mental revolution, it facilitates workers' development, reduces wastage, guarantees smooth production. So please go through all these points, and then you can find some approaches of the employee relations, like the psychological approach, human relations approach, sociological approach, Gandhian approach, ethical approach, Dunlop's system approach. So this is not that kind of important, but you can't expect what will come for examination. So please go through all these points. Then you can find the role of government in the employee relations. So what does the government have? What role does the government have in employee relations? So what does it do? It improves the standard of living. It promotes industrial growth. It acts as an umpire, and it protects the interests of the labor, and some of the other roles as a state can be also found. Then comes what are the causes of poor employee relations? Like how come the employee relation doesn't work in an organization? What are the reasons for poor employee relations in an organization? It can be because of the type of work. Maybe the type of work will not let the employees have a smooth relationship in the organization. Then comes unfair wages and working conditions. So if the working conditions is and they'll be having very poor or unfair remuneration, there can arise poor employee relations in that particular organization. Then comes the defective trade union system. So if the trade union in that organization is not effective, then of course poor employee relations can happen. Then comes the lack of job stability, poor behavioral climate, etc. So these are the causes of the poor employee relations. Then comes what are the remedies or the measures for improving employee relations? So how can you improve the employee relations in an organization? So first of all, what the organization or the employees need is the support from the top management. So the one who makes the decisions in an organization. So if the support of the top management is there for the employees, then of course they'll have a very smooth employee relations in that particular organization. Okay, then comes strong and stable union. As I've told earlier, like the causes of poor employee relations is because of the defective trade union. So if you have a stable and strong union like trade unions, then of course you'll have a very good employee relations in that organization. Then comes providing training to supervisors. Yes, supervisors should be given training so that they can motivate or improve the morale of the employees who are working under the supervisors. So if they are properly trained, then there can be smooth employee relations in that organization. Then comes using methods of workers' participation. So as workers are important asset of the organization, all should be given a proper opportunity or a stage to participate. They should also be involved in certain decision making, etc. Then comes feeling of trust. So employees should have a feeling of belongingness, and they should have a feeling of trust in that organization in order to have a smooth employee relations. And then you can find some other points like mutual accommodation, proper implementation of agreements. So if there is an agreement between the employer and the employee, or if there is a negotiation of collective bargaining, so those agreements should be implemented so that the employee relations can run smoothly. Then comes the sound HR policies, government's role. So government role is also another very important thing. So if the government's certain rules and regulations has an impact in the smooth relationship of the employee and the employer. Okay, then comes the follow-up results as mentioned here. I request you to please go through all these points. Okay. Now let's move on to the topic employee relations in unionized and non-unionized organizations. So before moving on to that topic, let's see what is a trade union. So we all know that a trade union is actually an organization made up of members. That is, it is a membership-based organization, and its membership must be made up mainly of workers. One of trade unions' main aim is to protect and advance the interests of its members in the workplace. And most trade unions are independent of any employer. Okay, now let's see why workers join unions. See, basically they join, like they have to protect themselves. While working in an organization, they'll have to protect themselves. So, in order to get higher wages and better working conditions, they join a union. And for job security, for other social needs, they'll join a trade union. Then for upgrading their skills and knowledge, then some people they join because of the peer pressure, like peer pressure from their colleagues or other employees. Then comes self-fulfillment. So, in order to fulfill their self-desires and needs, they may join trade unions. What are the objectives and importance of a trade union? Like, what is their role in the organization? So basically for wages and salaries. So policy matter, but differences in implementation. So comes the role of trade union. That in order to improve the working conditions, in order to maintain a discipline in the organization, in order to fight against the improper implementation of personal policies with respect to recruitment, selection, promotion, transfer, training, etc. Then in order to maintain the welfare and welfare of the employees, then employer-employee relations, all these have to be maintained. So these are all the importance or the objective of trade union. So here you can see what is the difference between a union workplace and non-union workplace. So let's see what is a unionized workplace. So unionized workplace is the one in which, or the organization in which there is a trade union. So in unionized workplace, wages, hours and working conditions are set by a collective agreement. That means when it is unionized, all the employees will have an equal participation, and they'll have to discuss among themselves about not only the employee but also the trade union members, the whoever is the captain or whoever it is. They'll have a discussion and the collective bargaining, a collective agreement. They'll come to a proper wage selection and hours and working conditions. Then in non-unionized workplace, each individual will negotiate own wages, hours and working conditions subject to minimum and floors set out in the Employment Standard Act. So in the non-unionized workers, there won't be like collective members won't be there. So each individual, they'll have to speak for themselves. Then let's see the other difference. So in a unionized workplace, workers may grieve dismissal or layoff if successful may be reinstated. And in the non-unionized workplace, workers may be dismissed and be paid an amount equivalent to pay for a reasonable notice period, and there is no right to reinstatement. And in a unionized workplace, layoff, promotion, benefits, vacation scheduling usually subject to seniority. But in case of non-union workplace, employees may lay off or promote whomever they wish, regardless of seniority. Now let's see some more differences. Moving on to the other differences, in a unionized workplace or in a unionized organization, workers can use strikes and work to rule to pressure employer into making a favorable collective agreement for all members of the bargaining unit. But in the case of a non-unionized organization, individual workers usually has to negotiate alone and has a little leverage. And then the next difference is that in a unionized organization, workers may have to be members of the union and must pay union dues in exchange for union's fair representation of all members of the bargaining unit. They have to pay some amount of money to the union, like in order to be a member of that particular union. And so this is an advantage for the non-unionized organization, like non-union membership required, and there won't be any no dues pay also will be there. Okay, so these are several differences. So you can find some other differences in your textbook as well, like in your page 193, you can find certain topics there, like effective communication, like how is the communication in a unionized workplace and how is the communication in a non-unionized workplace. So like usually in a unionized workplace, the communication will be more effective because there are representatives to represent you, like they represent your problems to the organization and then you'll have a collective result. So that so an effective communication always takes place in a unionized workplace. And then informal consultation, service quality improvement. So several points are mentioned here, so please do go through them. Also so employee relations in unionized and non-unionized organizations, that unions can be used by employees to negotiate or bargain on the issues related to the salary, wages, workplace safety, policy and procedures, employee benefits and complaint procedures. And in most of the cases, higher wages are earned by unionized employees in comparison to those employees who work in a non-unionized organization. The union employees receive greater benefits. Greater turnover ratio, strikes and poor work quality can emerge due to the dissatisfaction resulted from some policies of the union. and lesser number of employees is hired by unionized firms in comparison to the situation under competitive market. And on the other hand, non-unionized firms absorb surplus employees at lesser wage rates and on job requiring fees. So you can just go through all these things mentioned in your textbook. And in your page number 192, you can see an example of a formal grievance procedure in a unionized firm as well as a non-unionized firm. So you can just go through them and just on it. So different kinds of conflicts can be generated in any organization, be it a union or a non-union. So don't think that just because it is a non-union workplace, there won't be any handling of grievances or any kind of conflict. Yes, there will be handling, but it won't be in a proper or ineffective way when compared to unionized firm. So in unionized firm, handling grievances is like, you can just it takes place like in a spur of a moment. Like if there is a conflict, people represent you, they'll all join together, they'll work hard in order to resolve that particular conflict. And it will be in a more and effective way because there will be effective communication that happens in this unionized firm. So, but in case of your non-unionized firm, such kind of effective communication won't take place. So you can go through both the figures that mentioned here. Please do go through them. Moving on to the topic, participative management or workers' participation in management. So let's see what is participative management. So participative management refers to as an open form of management where employees are actively involved in organizations' decision-making process. It can also be termed as industrial democracy, co-determination, employee involvement as well as participative decision-making. So what is this participative management? Okay, it is also known as employees' involvement or participation, and encourages the involvement of stakeholders at all levels of an organization in the analysis of problems, development of strategies, and implementation of solutions. Employees are invited to share in the decision-making process of the firm by participating in activities such as setting goals, determining work schedules, and making suggestions. Other forms of participative management include increasing the responsibility of employee, like job enrichment, forming self-managed teams, quality circles or quality of work-life committees, and socializing survey feedback. Participative management involves more than allowing employees to take part in decision making. It also involves management treating the ideas and suggestions of employees with consideration and respect. The most extensive form of participative management is direct employee ownership of a company. So why is this participative management so important? When employees are involved in decision making process of an organization, they'll feel a self of belongingness, okay, and they get a platform to express their views and opinions. So this will benefit both the organization as well as the employees also. They can get a more perspectives. They can bring their talent out, and whereas the organization can look the decision in a different kind of view. Like different people are working in the organization, in different levels of society, different backgrounds. So they are all ideas the organization can look into and thus form a decision. So always participative management is important. You can see in your textbook a definition by Davis. Participation is a mental and involvement of a person in a group situation which encourages him to contribute to goals and share responsibilities in them. There are certain features of participative management. So first one is the responsibility of the participant. When participative management is there in an organization, of course there is a responsibility of the participants. So participants are the employees or the stakeholders, whoever is related to the organization. They are the stakeholders or the participants. So they will have a responsibility, they'll have a voice there. Then comes a democratic principle. In modern days large industries, it is not possible for all workers to for all workers to participate in decision-making process individually. Therefore, the principle of democracy or electing a forum is followed. So, a democratic principle or a policy is formed in participative management organization. Then comes the ability to impact decisions. The organization should be ready to accept all kinds of decisions, all kinds of views and ideas from different participants. Participants, I mean, they are the employees or the stakeholders. Then influence on policy formulations and execution. Workers' participative management is not merely confined to operational decision making, but also encompasses policy formulation and execution. It is pervasive at all organization levels in different forms. And the participation is limited only till the consultation phase in joint consultation. And on the other hand, under joint decision making, the decision-taking authority is shared and everyone gets equal say in it. That means every participant, they'll get an equal voice. Okay, they all have an equal viewpoint. Next one is self-management. Once workers get involved in managerial responsibilities, they tend to become more responsible. They'll be punctual, they'll be efficient, they'll be disciplined, they'll have certain enthusiasm, etc., and they'll tend to automatically improve. This is possible because under workers' participative management, the managerial operations are completely in the hand of employees. That is self-management. So these are the features of self-management. Then what is the scope of participative? Like, to what extent can this participative management go? So it comes like in see certain points mentioned here, like opinion sharing, influence on final decisions, self-control, etc. And there are certain objectives of the participative management. What is the aim of participative management? So it is like to enhance the productivity. So when workers are given a platform to express their views in the decision making, they will work hard. They'll have certain enthusiasm. They will be motivated. They will have a self of belongingness in the organization, and hence they will. This will in turn enhance the productivity because they will tend to work harder and for the productivity of the organization. Then to come to promote internal democracy. So a democratic environment or democratic industry is where like all are given voice, all are given equal participation. So in order to do that, participative management will help to promote internal democracy. Then comes to promote the harmony. So once workers are also given an equal viewpoint or equal voice or equal say in the decision making, there'll be harmony in the organization. It'll be like smooth relationship can happen in that organization. Then to ensure better communication. So when they are given equal participations, the employees will communicate better. So there'll be a smooth communication between the top management and the bottom management. Mention here like to increase the workers' accountability, to provide emotional contentment, to raise the quality of work life, to establish mutual cooperation, etc. And then we can see what are the prerequisites for a successful participation. So in order to have a successful participation in an organization, there are certain points that should be remembered here. The first one is that cordial organizational environment. So for successful participation of the workers, the overall organization climate should be cordial. Okay, that means it should be conducive in nature. There should be proper mutual respect within the organization, and the administration should be interested in and must acknowledge workers' ideas, opinions, viewpoints, grievances, etc. and must appreciate them also. Then the next prerequisite is that adequate time for participation. As I've told that participant management is about bringing democracy in the organization. Therefore, when so democracy is all about having equal rights to everyone. So there should be equal time, adequate time for participation. Employees should be able to have enough time to express their viewpoints, to involve, to participate. They should have enough time for participation. Then comes the importance of the issue of participation. The topic of the participation should hold equal importance to both the organization and the participants. The entire participation exercise would be futile or wasteful if the subject is not mutual interest or concern. Then comes potential workers. In order to participate, the workers should possess the ability and know-how. Only potential workers or their representatives are suitable for the participation. So this is the role where the HR, this is the role of the HR manager. So when they are recruiting or selecting certain personals for the organization, they should be careful while selecting those employees. They should select the ones who are skilled enough, the talented employees, so that they have the ability to participate. They have those important points they should have, like a vague. They should not have any kind of vague ideas and all. They should be talented enough to express their views and all. So they should have that particular ability and know-how. So the participation of workers should have relevant importance towards the organization goals and should be beneficial in. Then comes the effective communication. Yes, in order to have a effective participative management in an organization, there should be a smooth communication in the organization. Like the top management and the bottom management should, the flow of communication should be smooth enough so that the participative management can be done effectively. Then comes the protection of authority. Certain other points are also mentioned here, like the participation cost. So all these. Let's see what are the levels of participation. So workers' participation may exist in all levels of management. However, it may vary from management to management. And participation of workers in management is more likely at lower level and less involvement of the top level management. So broadly speaking, there are following 5 levels of participation of workers in management. So first one is the information participation, consultative participation, associative participation, administrative participation, and decisive participation. So let's see one by one. What is informative participation? At the initial stage, the participation generally takes the stage of informative and associative participation, where members have the right to receive information and give opinion on matters of general economic importance. So it ensures that the employees are able to receive information and express the views pertaining to the matter of general economic importance. Next one is the consultative participation. Under this kind of workers' participation, many act as a consultant in the matters of workers' safety, health, and the welfare at the workplace. So ultimate decision lie in the hand of the management. Only employees will views are considered as advice. Next comes the associative participation. This kind of workers' participation in management is the next level to consultative participation. Under associative participation of workers in management, morally bound to accept and implement the opinion of the employees. Next one is the administrative participation. At the next higher level, it is administrative participation, which provides a greater degree of share in the authority and responsibility in the management functions. The last one is the decision of participation. It is the highest level of the participation, where workers are given opportunity to take part in decision-making power activities. And as the name suggests, the decision-making power at this level is complete and the delegation of authority is maximum. It is important to note that participation in management is generally taken to mean only general consultation on matters concerning the safety, welfare, etc. of the workers and nothing more. The ultimate responsibility is vested in the management itself. So that's all about the level of participation. Then you can see some factors influencing participative management. You can see all those points here, like the scope of participation level, type of subject involved, level of maturity, etc. Then there is another topic here, the methods of participative management in India. So first one is the collective bargaining. So what is collective bargaining actually? It's actually like a group of people come together, they'll discuss something and they'll come to a general agreement. So collective bargaining takes place between the management and the representatives of workers, generally in trade union leaders. This is done in order to resolve the issues which arise due to the interest of management and the workers. Next one is the participation through staff or work council. These councils are represented only by the employees. Either a single work council can be made for the whole organization, or all the hierarchical level can have a separate work council. So through staff or work councils, participation can happen. So we are discussing here about the methods of the participative management in India. Next one is the joint management council and committees. So there is no considerable attention paid to these councils by the management and by the workers. Because they only recommend and suggest things instead of doing proper negotiation. Then there are many other methods like the board representation, participation through complete control, participation through ownership, participation through job enlargement and enrichment. So please go through all the other points as well. Also, you can go through the schemes of participative management in India. Just go through them, not that important. But you can't guess what is going to come for your exam. Then, as I've already mentioned, like what is the importance of participative management? I told like it is important to involve the employees in the decision making because they can work productively for the organization. So some importance are mentioned here, like it provides organization balance. So there's a balance between the employer and the employee, and decreases certain misunderstandings. It lessens the industrial conflict, opportunity of individual growth, enhances the productivity, supports industrial democracy. It facilitates certain changes, be it any change like technological or environmental change, fulfills certain needs, and improves the quality of decisions. And also you can find certain limitations of participative management. So please do these points. Let's see what is grievance. So grievance is a formal complaint that is raised by an employee towards an employer within the workplace. There are many reasons as to why a grievance can be raised and also many ways to go about dealing with such a scenario. So a grievance can be any dissatisfaction or a feeling of injustice having connection with one's employment situation which is brought to the attention of management. Speaking broadly, a grievance is any dissatisfaction that adversely affects organizational relations and productivity. What a grievance is, it is necessary to distinguish between dissatisfaction, complaint and grievance. So let's see what is dissatisfaction or complaint and grievance. So dissatisfaction is anything that disturbs an employee, whether or not the unrest is expressed in words. Complaint is a spoken or written dissatisfaction brought to the attention of the supervisor or the shop or the employer. Grievance is a complaint that has been formally presented to a management representative or to a union official. Now there are many definitions for grievance in your textbook. Let's see the definition by Dale Yoder. Grievance is a written complaint filed by an employee and claiming unfair treatment. So in short, grievance is a state of dissatisfaction, expressed or unexpressed, written or unwritten, justified or unjustified, having connection with employment situation. Now what is the nature of a grievance? So you can see certain nature, like it is always a dissatisfaction or discontent that arise among the employee. And it can be written or oral. There can be diverse reasons for the cause of a grievance. A grievance can be legal or illegal, and it leads to frustration, dissatisfaction, unhappiness or negligence of work, etc. And the grievance can be regarding an individual or a group of employees. And next is that there are many forms of grievances. So it is like you can see three forms here: factual, imaginary and disguised. So factual is the one in which the employer and the employee relationship is based on the organization's employment contract. It is the employment contract which specifies the norms that define the limits of employee's expectation from the organization to meet his requirements and expectations. So when expectations are not met by the organization, here's the point, that is when expectations are not met by the organization, the employee gets disappointed with his job. This type of disappointment is known as factual grievance. For example, like salary hike is promised to employee after 1 year but not given. So that is kind of a factual grievance. Imaginary grievance can arise when employee is dissatisfied due to his wrong perception or negative. So it is based on his mind and perspectives, etc. So negative attitude and incorrect information, that is called the imaginary one. Imaginary one is the one in which he imagines a certain grievance. It can be like not proper one, or it can be just imaginary ones. Okay, not like a kind of factual one. So it can be wrong sometimes, it can be correct sometimes. So it's not it's always you cannot depend on imaginary grievances. The next one is the disguised grievance. In disguised grievance, the employer is not aware about the reason for satisfaction. Then he has a disguised grievance. Generally, employees' psychological needs like need for appreciation, friendliness, authority, success, etc. are not met. For example, an employee who is dissatisfied with the work conditions of the company may desire some appreciation and praise from his co-workers. Therefore, disguised grievance must also be given due consideration, because if they are neglected, they can have harmful consequences. Now let's see what are the different causes of grievances. So there are many causes of grievance. Basically, it arises from the work. Like it can be because of the working conditions or the time of the work, or there are many because of any conflict or something. So here you can see certain points like management practices, like the management style, like social distances, implementation of personal policies, communication gap, supervisory practices. Then comes the grievance resulting from personal maladjustment or personal misunderstandings, like negative attitude of the employee, health problems, impractical expectations. Then is the working conditions. So I've already mentioned about the working conditions. If the working condition is poor or the employee is not fit to work in that environment, then there can be that can be a cause of grievance. So there are many causes of grievance. So how can you identify grievances? So it can be, here you can see like many ways in which you can identify grievances. It can be through observation. The next one is the grip boxes. So let's see what is grip boxes. In this, employees can drop their written complaints pertaining to any aspect of work in the boxes kept by the organization, just like complaint boxes. So in the complaint boxes, it be anonymous. Like people can write their complaint and they can leave it like without writing their name, so that no one will know, and they can just write the complaint there, and the authorities will come and check this complaint. So basically, they are placing a complaint box. And then comes the open door policy, exit interviews, and opinion surveys. So these are all the kinds of methods identify grievances. Then let's see what is the effect of grievances. So effect of grievances is like on three bases you can see, like on the production, on the employees, and on the managers. So what is the effect on the production? So if at all any grievances come, what will be the effect on the production? Production can be like low quality of production, low productivity, increase in the wastage of materials, spoilage, leakage of machinery, increase in the cost of production per unit. So these will be the causes, the effects on the production. Then comes the effect on the employees. What happens when there is a grievance among the employees? What are the effects on the employees? Obviously, there will be a rate of absenteeism and turnover, reduction in the level of commitment, sincerity and punctuality, increase in the incidence of accidents, and reduction in the level of employee morale and motivation also. Then what are the effects on the managers? Strained superior subordinate relations. So there will be a poor relation among the superior and subordinate. Increase in the degree of supervision and control, increase in indisciplined cases, and increase in unrest and thereby machinery to maintain industrial peace. So these are all the effect of Now let's have a look on how to handle grievances or the steps in grievance handling procedure. So here we have about six steps or six stages, starting with the identification of grievances, define the grievances, data collection, analyze and solving, prompt redressal, implementation and follow-up. So let's start. Identification of grievance. So before starting any kind of procedures, especially in grievance procedure, you have to identify what is the problem there. Identify what is the grievance or the kind of problem there. So it can be all those grievances of the employees which are not being disclosed must be recognized by the management. And then you have to define it correctly. So once the grievances are identified, you will have to define them. Okay, that means the management should define them correctly. The third step is to collect the data. So all those informations regarding how to solving the grievances or identifying the grievances, all kinds of data related to that problem should be collected. So every data related to grievance must be gathered from all sources, and after that it should be classified as facts, data and opinions. Next one is to analyze and solve. So the next step is to, once the data is collected, you'll have to analyze those data, and then based on the information what you've got, you'll have to solve the problem or solve that grievances or solve that complaint. After data collection, analysis of information must be done in order to develop alternative solutions and select the best solution. So you have to develop certain solutions, and then you have to come out with the best solution. Then comes the prompt redressal. Analysis of the grievances is done. It must be redressed immediately by implementing the solution in a speedy manner. So once you've come out with a solution to solve this problem, you must inform others, like inform the employees who've got the complaints about them, and there's a redressal procedure is done there. Then comes the implementation and follow-up. So once it's redressed, once the problem or the solution is redressed, you'll have to implement the solution, implement whatever you have come up, what are the decisions that you've made, you'll have to implement it, and you have to on a regular basis you'll have to follow up, like you have to check if at all that problem arises again or not. So these are the basic 6 steps of handling grievances. So in your textbook you can see a model of handling grievances. So please do go through that. Then you can find some grievance machinery under Industrial Dispute Act in 1947, and essentials of grievance handling procedures, grievance resolution methods. So all these things, please do go through them. Then you can see certain advantages and disadvantages of grievance handling procedure. Now that's all about the grievance handling and all. So please do go through all those points and all. Moving on to the next topic, we have discipline. So we all know what is discipline. So discipline is it means the order in work and conduct of organizational members. Discipline is necessary in an organization to ensure that all employees of the organization they follow the rules, regulations and procedures while carrying out their jobs. Now, according to Dale S. Beach, discipline regulates by reward or penalty the human behavior. So, in simple words, the word discipline notates orderly behavior by the members of the. In other words, discipline implies behaving in a desired manner. By that we mean that employees conform to the rules and regulations framed by the organization for an acceptable behavior. What might be the nature of discipline? So it is a standard behavior. So having a disciplined organization implies that there is a standard behavior in that organization. And it is a motivating force, because discipline will act as a motivating force, and it will encourage the employees to act in an orderly manner in the organization. And it can be positive or negative in nature. So certain disciplines can be positive in nature, and certain disciplines might be negative in nature. you see, certain disciplines can become, can become the cause of termination of the employees. That's why it's said that disciplines are negative. Then why it is positive? Because it kind of motivates the employees. When there are certain disciplines, they for example, one of the discipline might be like coming early to the coming on the right time to the office. So if your work starts at 9 o'clock and if you're reporting like after 5 or 10 minutes, and then you'll have to face certain discipline orders. So why they do that is like, they are actually improving your time management skills. So if you obey their rules of time management, then you will face certain disciplinary action. So this in turn will motivate you like to perform in a better way. Then it can be voluntary or imposed, and it is a right of the management. So in every organization, having disciplinary actions for any kind of misbehavior is the right of the management. Then obviously it is a controlling force. So what is the objective of discipline? So why the discipline is kept in the organization is that because first one is to achieve goals. So every organization has certain goals and objectives. So in order to reach that goal, they'll have to keep certain disciplinary actions because they want to work hard to be more motivated and enthusiastic employees in order to achieve those goals and aim. Then it makes employees responsible. Of course, having disciplinary actions in the organization will make the employee responsible. So I've told about the time management. So if just imagine if an organization does not have any kind of disciplinary action, so that employee will come again late. Every day he'll come late. So and he'll take it as a practice. So and what happens to the organization? They will lose its production, right? The production will come down. So in order to prevent that, disciplinary actions are kept. So this will make the employees responsible. Then bringing desired behavioral changes to the employees. So there will be certain employees who might not be like they don't have good behavior. So what these disciplinary actions can bring out good behaviors in them. Then it increases the employee. It controls the employees and it maintains cordial relations between the employee and the management. It minimizes the cost of supervision, and so these are the objectives of discipline. Then you can see certain principles of discipline and the types of discipline. Disciplines can be positive, negative, progressive. So 3 types of disciplines are that. You can just go through them. Okay, yeah, that's all about the basics of discipline. Let's see how can we manage discipline. So discipline is actually the backbone of healthy industrial relation. The promotion and maintenance of employee discipline is essential for smooth functioning of an organization. Employee morale and industrial peace are definitely linked with the proper maintenance of discipline. Disciplinary action can also help the employee to become more effective. The action of one person can affect others in the group. Discipline administration can be defined as a systematic approach adopted by the company against any indiscipline at the workplace. These procedures describes all types of disciplines including presentation and documentation of warnings, representation of disciplinary interviews, etc. Now, disciplinary administration is considered to be important due to following reasons. It helps in reducing disputes and misunderstandings, and controlling the employees in an arranged way. It helps in aligning employees' behavior with standards of performance and with the organization's policies and procedures. While administering discipline within an organization, 2 main problems can occur. The first major problem is that the management fails to handle the indisciplined actions quickly as they occur. The second problem is that it involves the overreaction resulting from the implementation of a long overdue action. A set of suitable procedures makes a basic framework of an appropriate disciplinary program. Now let's see certain approaches to manage discipline. Here there are 3 approaches or three methods of discipline. First one is a red hot stove rule, progressive disciplinary action, and the third one is a disciplinary action without punishment. Let's see what is a red hot stove rule. Now this rule or this red hot stove rule was proposed by Douglas MacGregor, and it is useful for imposing disciplinary action in an organization. This rule is analogous to hot red stove. That means this rule is compared to red hot stove. So red hot stove, you have to compare this with the red hot stove. So it has a warning. It remains same for every person. That is, the intensity of pain is same with every person who touches the stove. Consistent disciplinary action, that is every pain as and when you touch the stove. So in the context of human resource management, we apply this rule as a disciplinary action against various acts of employees. There are certain principles of red hot stove rule. The first one is a principle of immediate action. So it is well known that whoever touches a very hot stove, he or she will burn his finger or hand immediately. That means he will burn immediately. Okay, so as soon as any kind of misconduct is done by the employer, the manager should immediately take action against that employee. The second principle is the principle of warning. So after touching the red hot stove, one person would definitely get hurt. Similarly, all the employees in that organization should be aware that, so that first employee is set as an example. So all the other employees should be aware that if he also touches that red hot stove, or if he also misconducts or violates any rules and regulations, he also will be given the same kind of punishment. Okay. So next one is the principle of impersonality. So every person who touches the red hot stove will get injured by the burn. So the red hot stove does not see who is touching it. In the same way, the disciplinary action should be equal for all employees, be it in whichever position he is, in whichever background he has come from. So it should be equal for all employees, and all the employees should be aware of that as well. And the manager should show the equal level of judgment to employees. The last principle is a principle of consistency. So when touching a red hot stove, every person will burn his fingers in the same way. The principle of red hot stove rule says that disciplinary action should be consistent for all the employees. Every employees, this rule must be consistent. Managers should impose the same punishment for everybody, regardless of the fact whether the violator is a male or a female. So this is the first rule. That means the first approach of managing discipline. The second one is a progressive disciplinary action. Progressive disciplinary action. First, the initial step taken here is a counseling. Informal counsel is given to that person who misconducts or behaves in the organization. So once that counseling is given, and if he does the same thing again and again, then next serious action might be taken. So if inappropriate behavior is minor in nature and has not previously occurred, an oral warning may be sufficient. If at all the oral warning is not enough, like if the person again does a mistake, the violation will require written warning according to the procedure. So after the oral and written warnings, and if the conduct of the employee is still not along the desired lines, serious actions can be initiated. In case of major violations such as hitting a supervisor, may justify the termination of the employee immediately. So in order to assist the manager to recognize a proper level of disciplinary action, some firms will have formalized procedures. So here you can see in your textbook a progressive disciplinary approach, a format. So first one is like it starts with the improper behavior. So if there is an improper behavior, and next step, like that is, does this violation warrant disciplinary action? If it is yes, then we'll go to the next step. If it is no, there is no disciplinary action. If it is yes, the next step is that if they'll check if the violation warrant has more than an oral warning. If it is no, then they'll just give an oral warning, and then they'll again check like if that if that violation has a written warning. So if it is no, then they'll give a written warning, and if it is yes, that means if that violator has got a written warning, it will go to suspension. So after suspension is next step is the termination. So this is the formal procedure of sample, a model procedure in an organization. So it starts with the oral warning, and then comes the written warning, and then comes the suspension, and then the termination. The third type, or the third approaches of managing disciplinary action without punishment. So in this, an employee is provided with a paid work off for preset number of days. So for a certain number of days, the employee is asked to stay home, like don't come to work, in order to offer some time to the employee to think whether he or she wants to follow the rules and regulations of the company and wants to continue with the job or not. So this is the kind of, it's not kind of a punishment, you can say, like, you know, they'll be, if at all the employee does a misbehavior, first he'll be asked to stay at home. Okay, so that he can think about whether he has done, whether he can repent. So whether he is ready to follow the rules and regulations of the organization. Such an approach enables a company to focus on making employees accountable for the activities and building the importance and fulfilling company's goals by ignoring the disciplinary procedures. So this is the thing where, like, you know, disciplinary action without a punishment. So they'll be given like minor things only, you know, minor things like just to think, like, you know, we in school we've seen that, like, if at all someone has done, especially in colleges and all, they won't give like beatings and all. In schools, if you see, if a student does any mistake or the teacher might beat him, okay, with a stick. But when you come to college, like what it'll be like minor punishments, like, you know, you may give like impositions or something. So you can't even call it as an imposition, punishment. So it's just a disciplinary action, you know. So that is all about the various approaches to, you know, discipline. Then managing discipline. So there are certain disciplinary procedures, like first it starts with the preliminary investigation, issue of a charge sheet, consideration of the explanation, notice of inquiry, suspension with or without pay, conduct of domestic inquiry, recording of finding by inquiry officer, awarding a punishment, communication of the punishment. So there are certain steps here. It's not that difficult, so you please go through them. Then so there are many other topics that comes under the disciplinary topic, like guidelines for disciplinary procedure, importance and advantages and disadvantages. So all these topics can be found in your textbook. I request you all to please. Misconduct or indiscipline. So it refers to the breach of discipline in an organization. It is an act or conduct which is inappropriate or against the welfare of the organization. Misconduct is when an employee does something wrong, either by doing something, not doing something, or through their behavior. This may justify some disciplinary actions being taken by the employer. So what are the causes of indiscipline or misconduct? It can be the violation of rules and regulations of the organization, indulging in acts which are detrimental to the organization, like theft, fraud, bribery, etc., immoral or dishonest conduct, causing damage or loss to the organization can be the causes of indiscipline or the misconduct. Certain other causes of misconduct are given here in your textbook, so you can go through them. So what is a disciplinary procedure? A disciplinary procedure is a structured approach to maintain discipline in an organization and to deal with disobedience at work. It will involve presenting verbal and written warnings to employee, investigating grievances, issues charge sheets, handling conflicts, punishing employees for misconduct. Now the last topic that we have here is the domestic inquiry. Domestic inquiry or inquiry is an internal hearing held by an employer to ascertain whether an employee is guilty of misconduct. The purpose of a domestic inquiry is to find out the truth of the allegations made against the workman. So it is an internal hearing which is conducted by the organization against one of its own employee in order to judge the employee whether he is guilty of any misconduct or not. So, finding out the real facts about the allegations made against a certain employee is the main objective of a domestic inquiry. All the rules and regulations related to natural justice must be adopted while conducting the domestic inquiry. So, based on the above description of the domestic inquiry, we understand that the term domestic inquiry is mainly used to refer to an inquiry into the charges of indiscipline and misconduct by an employee. So, in the common words, domestic inquiry means departmental inquiry or domestic tribunal. In such inquiries, the matter is decided by administrative officers and not by courts of law. In cases of alleged sin, it is common for disciplinary authorities in a department or in an industry to appoint an officer or officers to inquire into the allegations against an employee. So here in your textbook, you can see the individuals who are involved in inquiry. They are the inquiry officer, presenting officer, delinquent employee. Now, what is natural justice? So, natural justice is actually derived from the Latin or the Roman word jus naturali, which means the law of nature. That means the good conscience and equity. So, here there are basic two principles of natural justice. The first one is the nemo juris in causa sua, that is, the rules against bias. So, it means that the individual who is also interested in any case should not judge a case. That means there should not be any kind of bias. The justice not only be done, but it should also have a feel of justice being done. So, that means there should not be any kind of partiality in here. The next one is the audia laterem pactem, which means that the right to be heard. In this, it means that to hear all the party. The fundamental principle of this rule is that the proper opportunities should be given to every individual whose rights or interests are going to be hampered to defend himself. So, according to natural justice, the individual who is decisions must receive the opportunity to be heard before having any decisions on dispute. So, that is all about the natural justice and all. Now, how to conduct domestic inquiry. That is a topic which is given in your syllabus. Like there are certain processes there for conducting domestic inquiry. So first one is you have to initiate the inquiry. That is the name of all the participants. The inquiry process should be recorded. All those things will be the first one. Second one is to reaffirm the incident or offense. Like that whatever is the case, you have to confirm it. And it is opened by the presenting officer in the presence of all, and the witnesses are called along with the complainant and documentary proof supporting the claims. The third one is that before providing the chance to the delinquent employee to make any comment with reference to the offense for which a charge sheet is filed against him, the examination of the complaint and his is done. So, third step, the complainant is evaluated or examined, and his witness is also examined. Fourth one is all the witnesses and the complainant can be cross-examined by the delinquent employee on the oral statement along with any document which is being produced by the complainant during the examination. The fifth one is the delinquent employee. So here, what is a delinquent employee, by the way? So delinquent is actually referred to as a criminal or the one who has done a crime. So the delinquent employee is the one who has committed a crime or an offense. So the complainant is the one who is giving a complaint. So just to be clear about those two terms. So the fifth one is that the delinquent employee will be asked to present his case and to produce his witness after the cross-examination of the complainant and his witnesses. And all the statements of the witnesses will be recorded separately, and the cross-examinations can be conducted by the presenting officer, the complainant or his witnesses. Next, the sixth step is that all the questions necessary in the interest of the justice will be clarified by the inquiring officer or to the delinquent employee. So all those any type of questions and all will be answered here. The seventh one is the delinquent employee or his representative, presenting officer, witnesses, complainant and inquiry officer should sign all the proceedings of the domestic inquiry which is being recorded. So the domestic inquiry will be recorded, and all the documents related to that domestic inquiry should be signed by who all? First one is the delinquent employee or his representative, the presenting officer, the witnesses, and the complainant. The last step is in the offences. If the offences are accepted by the delinquent employee, it is not necessary to stop the inquiry. In order to avoid any type of future should be executed so that the confession of the delinquent employee can be recorded. So even if the employee has, that means the one who has done the crime has accepted his mistake, so they won't stop the inquiry there. They'll just go on until that the confession of the delinquent employee is recorded. So this is the formal procedure of conducting a domestic inquiry. So with this, we have come to the end of the module. The entire modules of human resource management. So I request you all to please do go through all the portions that I have not explained. That doesn't mean it won't be coming for the exam, but you have to go through them. So you have to take certain initiatives against this. So that's all, dear students. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.